We will move on to the last presentation of this session that will be given by Jan Crawford. Hello, Jan. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jessie. Yes, good to be here. Let me see if I can make this work. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. So I want to say something that may be slightly controversial. I want to start a conversation about a conversation I think we need to have, although it may not go down well in all corners of the community. Preserving the North Pole of the Moon. So I don't know whether you can see my pointer. Jessie, can you see the hand move?
Yes, we can.
Oh, magic. Thank you. Right. So obviously, this is not a picture of the North Pole of the Moon. This is the Kaguya's excellent, very beautiful picture of the South Pole of the Moon. But I show it here because I couldn't find such a good picture of the North Pole of the Moon, but also because this is the part of the Moon where there's going to be a huge hive of activity in the coming decades, we all hope, and there'll be tremendous excitement, scientific excitement, and the possibility of commercial activities on the Moon. And a lot of that's likely to happen here around the lunar South Pole in the coming decades. But there is a tension, I think, that's going to become increasingly apparent between scientific exploration of the lunar poles and commercial activities, both in situ resource activities to support scientific operations on the Moon itself, and also a likely expansion of commercial activities where the aim is to use space resources to pay for help develop a space economy, from which there'll be many benefits. And I'm fully supportive of all of these activities, but I think there will be a tension. So just to remind us of the scientific importance of the lunar poles, and particularly the permanently shadowed regions. So first bullet point, we've heard a lot about this morning already. Yes, the permanently shadowed regions of the lunar poles probably preserve a record of volatile materials, so water, but other volatiles and very likely organic materials that have been delivered to the inner solar system from the outer solar system through time. And this is of great scientific interest, and these materials are probably preserved in permanently shadowed regions. Second bullet point, I just want to remind everyone that Paul Lucy suggested in 2000, and then they're followed up by Sarah Kreitz et al. More recently. These ices have the potential to be of great astrobiological interest, not only because they're a record of possible volatiles and organics delivered to the Earth-Moon system, but because these ices will have been exposed over time to cosmic rays, galactic cosmic rays especially, and so they have the potential to be a sort of natural Miller-Urey type reactors, where cosmic rays come in, strike these ices, break chemical bonds, and more complicated molecules, prebiotic, possibly organic molecules, are assembled. Now, those are very important processes to understand. They doubtless happen in the outer solar system, and they probably happen on the icy surfaces of interstellar grains. But the most accessible place in the solar system we have to study those processes is probably the poles of our own Moon. And yet these organic molecules that may be synthesized by these processes may be especially susceptible to contamination. So there is a record, I mean, even more so than the isotope record or the other records that we might be interested in, the possibly very low concentrations of prebiotic molecules produced by cosmic ray bombardment. They potentially could be compromised by contamination. Third bullet point, not often remembered in the geoscience community, is that there are other astronomical communities who have an interest in these permanently shadowed regions as well, because they're potentially useful locations for certain types of astronomical observations. Passively cooled infrared telescopes, for example. But there are several papers have appeared recently on gravitational wave detectors that could have placed in permanently shadowed regions on the Moon, where they would benefit from especially the cold, the low temperature conditions and the lack of thermal expansion and contraction over time. So there are these other possible scientific reasons for wanting to preserve some of the environment in permanently shadowed regions. And yet here there will be the tension, right? Because here's the Shackleton crater. If we have commercial companies mining ice in Shackleton crater to support, let's say, the kind of research station that Dave Parker talked about, and I completely endorse, we absolutely do need a lunar base on the lunar poles. But if it's extracting its water from permanently shadowed craters, then these environments are inevitably going to be disturbed. And so there'll be a tension between using the materials to support scientific exploration and yet disturbing the very environment that we wish to study. And this will only get worse with time, especially if commercial operators start mining lunar volatiles for other purposes. So just to reiterate the point I made, here's a moon base being built, and yet we build things like this. There's going to be a tension between studying the lunar environment and utilizing it. And permanently shadowed regions in particular may be compromised by exhaust gases from rockets, extraneous organics that may be introduced, the lofting and deposition of dust, and other consequences which we currently haven't studied at all and we know nothing about. And as regards the possible motion of organic materials from rocket exhaust, there's this very interesting paper by Pavathi Prem recently that I can refer you to. So it's fortunate, therefore, that the moon has two poles. On the right here's the South Pole with its very extensive regions of permanent shadow, and this is where all of this activity is likely to happen in the coming decades. And these red areas are permanently shadowed regions from the Mazzarico paper. And on the left here is the North Pole with some scattered, less surface area. Integrated surface area a bit less, but still a good scattering of permanently shadowed regions in the North Pole, where currently, as far as I know, no actual planned missions are targeted for yet. So there's a potential window of opportunity where we could decide for the time being to carry out our activities at the South Pole until we understand exactly what effect they're having on a lunar polar environment. And only once we've fully understood that and are confident that we're not going to disturb the scientific records that might exist in these permanently shadowed regions, move our activities to the North Pole. So this would be kind of keeping the North Pole as a kind of insurance policy. So these areas show that within about 10 degrees of latitude of the lunar poles, these maps, and I've drawn on the thick dashed circles. These are the limits that the revised Coastbar planetary protection policy has decided to instigate in its attempt to try and preserve the polar environments. But I think the point is here that the Coastbar policy, if we're really serious about preserving polar environments on the moon, the Coastbar policy certainly doesn't go anywhere near far enough. And as you can kind of see glancing at these two maps, rather strangely, it provides less protection for the North Pole than the South Pole, because it's only has only proposed to delineate a smaller area around the North Pole, which would qualify for its enhanced protections. But even these enhanced protections will be woefully inadequate. So, as you probably know, Coastbar recently did attempt to try and recognise the lunar poles as being of special interest. So most of the moon, their category 2 for the moon has been split into 2 parts. Most of the moon falls within what's now their Coastbar category 2A, for which operators need only provide a simple planetary protection plan, a post-mission report of what they did, and an inventory of organic products released by their propulsion system. Whereas for regions of the moon north of 86 degrees north, so only 4 degrees north of the pole, that's the small circle, and for latitudes greater than 79 degrees south, so that's 11 degrees from the South Pole, that's the big circle down here. Within these regions, higher protections are required, but only that the inventory needs to extend from not just organics released by the propulsion system, but all organics carried by the spacecraft with a mass of 1 kilogram. So the lunar poles are slightly more protected, but only to the extent of providing documentation of organic materials with a mass of more than 1 kilogram. And yet it's clear that documentation on its own doesn't protect anything. We could document what's on these spacecraft going to the North Pole and find that we've contaminated North Polar permanently shadowed regions. And so we've documented what we took to the North Pole, but having a document doesn't decontaminate the North Pole. And it may be if it were to be contaminated. So having this, and it may then not be possible to use the documentation to deconvolve back to the pristine environment. So having the documentation may not be sufficient. So just to reiterate my point, given this, and given that most lunar activities are polar activities of all polar activities, to my knowledge, that are seriously planned, they're going to the South Pole, there's a narrow window opportunity here to consider a moratorium on operations at the North Pole until we understand the effects of all our activities at the South Pole. One possibility would be to declare the North Pole of the Moon to be a planetary park. This is a concept introduced by Charles Coquelle and Gerda Horneck some time ago. They were thinking in terms of parts of Mars that they felt should be specially preserved from future exploration activities. But I think maybe there's a case for making the North Poles of the Moon the first planetary park. OK, I see I've got a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, but I'll finish there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. That was a very interesting presentation. Do we have any questions for Jan?
I have a question for Ian, if I may.
Oh yeah, Mahesh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Ian, how could this moratorium be achieved in the global community? What do you think is the best vehicle to achieve that or progress that?
I think how I could go on marching into utopias that are currently out of reach as regards the international control and coordination of space activities. But in the short term, I think we'd probably have to start with COSPAR. I think firstly, it's very odd. I don't know whether you can still see the diagram. I don't know what you can still see. Maybe I'm still sharing my slides. It is very odd that the North Polar region is less protected than the South Polar region. I mean, this circle 4 degrees from the North Pole, there are still lots of permanently shadowed, including some of the biggest ones outside of it, which are not even covered by the current supposedly more protective category 2B. It's very odd that they chose such a small circle around the North Pole for their enhanced protection. So even though I don't think their enhanced protection is anywhere near what we would require, I think the way to start is to try and get COSPAR firstly to maybe expand their circle around the North Pole, but secondly to start a suggestion that maybe rather than just putting limits on specifying what space operators within these circles must document, we could start having a conversation about whether there should be a moratorium on activities around the North Pole until we understand what happens at the South Pole. I think we'd have to start with COSPAR in the near future. I can't see another route.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Just two additional points there, if I may, is that I don't know who was involved in redrawing these things recently. So if anybody here is present who was party to that, maybe they can enlighten us about the differential. And secondly, I wondered if Ian, you will be there at the COSPAR meeting in Athens in July, where at least my panel has been invited to participate, and there is a planetary protection thing on the table. So from ESSC point of view, it could be very useful to actually bring that message back to COSPAR if that's what the community wants.
Yes, so I will be at COSPAR. I will be giving this talk at Athens, although it's actually in the PEX meeting, the Planetary Exploration meeting, rather than the Planetary Protection Panel meeting. Athena has already been on to me about that. But anyway, I will be at Athens, and I will try and advocate, try and stimulate a discussion at COSPAR. Yeah.
Okay, if we can have like 2 more minutes, we have a very interesting question from Roma in the chat. Considering that volatile species might be migrating from low latitude to the pole over time, have we not already contaminated both poles over the past 50 years?
Yes, at some level. I mean, this is the essence of Pavathi Prem's paper. So yes, but we can't go back in time and undo it. And neither am I advocating putting curtailments on activities at the South Pole. I think for all sorts of scientific and commercial reasons, there are good reasons for wanting to pursue these activities at a lunar pole. So what can we do? I mean, given this, all we can do is try and protect the environment that's furthest away from all this activity at the South Pole, and that is the North Pole. So I think yes, some contamination is likely to occur, but the only way to minimise it is to might be to have a pause on activity at the North Pole, and this would at least minimise possible contamination, even though of course you're right, it won't prevent it.
There is one last question for you also in the chat. If you can be more specific about preserving, do you consider that an impact like L-cross is contamination?
Well, I don't. I must have disturbed the environment to some extent, and so to some extent it must have contaminated the environment. So I'm not advocating for a cessation of all such activities. I'm just advocating that we don't pursue them at the North Pole until we understand the effect of them at the South Pole. I'm a bit worried about Mahesh. His image seems to have frozen, at least on my screen.
Yeah, it might be ready for lunch.
No, I switched off my camera, so I don't know why it was frozen on your thing. I'm here. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jan, also for your time to answer the questions.